He was walking through the silent, snow-covered forest when he stumbled upon a tiny bundle shivering under the trees. What he found inside, and the note wrapped with it, was something he could never forget. The wind whispered through the pine trees as Jason trudged deeper into the forest, his boots crunching the thick layer of snow beneath him. He had set out to escape the noise of the town, to find a moment of peace in the vast, frozen wilderness. Hours had passed, and the forest had grown increasingly silent, the only sounds the distant cawing of crows and the occasional cracking of ice on a nearby creek. Then, something unusual caught his eye, a small, ragged bundle partially hidden under the snow near a fallen log. Curiosity turned quickly into alarm as he knelt closer. The bundle was moving. A soft, muffled cry escaped from within. Jason's heart raced. He carefully picked it up, feeling the tiny weight of what could only be a baby. Its body shivered uncontrollably, teeth chattering against the cold. He wrapped it in his coat for warmth and immediately noticed the small piece of paper pinned to the blanket, its edges frozen stiff. Trembling, Jason unfolded the note. The ink was smudged, but the words were legible enough to read, "Do not trust anyone. It knows things it shouldn't. Protect it, at all costs." His stomach churned. At first, he thought it was a prank, someone's cruel idea of humor. But the urgency in the writing, combined with the helpless baby in his arms, made him pause. The forest around him suddenly felt oppressive. Shadows stretched unnaturally among the trees, the fading light filtering through the branches in long, angular shapes. Jason had 1,000 questions. Why was a baby abandoned here in the snow? Who had left the note, and what did it mean by "it knows things it shouldn't"? And most pressingly, how could he save this child before the cold consumed it? He glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching, waiting to reclaim what they had abandoned, but the forest offered nothing but silence. He tucked the baby closer to his chest, feeling its fragile warmth, and made the decision he would take the child to his cabin. The thought of leaving it in the woods, even for a moment, was unbearable. Yet, as he began to walk, the cries grew louder, echoing through the still forest in a way that sounded almost deliberate. It was as if the baby itself was aware of the danger that the note warned about. Every instinct in Jason screamed that this was no ordinary infant. The hike back to his cabin was grueling. The snow was deep, the wind biting at his face, and every shadow seemed to move with purpose. He stumbled at one point, nearly dropping the bundle, and cursed under his breath, trying to shake off the mounting tension. By the time he reached the small clearing where his cabin stood, dusk had turned the forest into a world of silhouettes and shadows. He hurried inside, locked the door behind him, and laid the baby gently on a thick blanket in front of the fireplace. The infant's eyes were wide, unblinking, staring up at him with a gaze that seemed far older than its months. Jason felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced at the note again, trying to reconcile its ominous message with the tiny life before him. Whatever mystery he had stumbled into, he realized, it was only beginning. And whatever awaited him, the forest's secrets were now tied to the fragile bundle he held. Jason sat by the fire, the baby cradled gently in his arms, its small body trembling as the warmth of the cabin slowly seeped into its tiny frame. His hands shook as he unfolded the note again. The words seemed almost frantic, as if whoever had written them had feared for their life, or for the child's. Do not trust anyone. It knows things it shouldn't. Protect it, at all costs. Jason read the note over and over, trying to decipher its meaning. Was it a cryptic warning about someone or something outside? Or was it meant to hint at something within the child itself? He couldn't ignore the phrasing, "it knows things it shouldn't." What could a baby possibly know? The child's eyes followed his every movement, startlingly focused. It cooed softly, then suddenly stopped, as if aware of Jason's thoughts. He felt a knot tighten in his chest. Was he imagining it? He shook his head, telling himself to focus. He needed to get warm, feed the baby, and think clearly. As he wrapped the infant in additional blankets, a flicker of movement caught his eye from the window. Shadows danced on the snow outside. Jason's heart pounded. The forest had been quiet all day, yet now it seemed alive, watching. He tried to calm himself, telling himself it was merely the wind or the flickering light of the fireplace casting illusions. Yet, deep down, he knew there was something else, something intangible but profoundly disturbing. The baby's cries subsided, replaced by quiet humming noises that sounded almost deliberate. Jason leaned closer, his brow furrowed. Could the note have been right? Could this child really know things it shouldn't? He didn't want to believe it, but a gut feeling, deep and primal, told him that the danger was real. Night fell. Jason fortified the cabin's windows, checking locks and barricading doors with anything he could find. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, felt amplified in the cold, empty cabin. And all the while, the baby slept fitfully, occasionally stirring, its eyes opening in the dark to stare at him. That gaze haunted him more than the wind, more than the shadows outside. Jason realized he faced a choice: ignore the note, treat the child as normal, or accept that the warning was real and prepare for a threat he didn't fully understand. His mind raced, every possible scenario playing out in dizzying succession. Despite the fear, he knew one thing: he would protect this child, even if it meant confronting something beyond his comprehension. The cabin was quiet, yet every sound seemed amplified. Snowflakes tapped against the roof like tiny drummers, and the faint whistle of wind through the trees added an eerie soundtrack. Jason wrapped the baby tightly in blankets, cradling it against his chest, but even as warmth seeped into its tiny body, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of dread. The note's warning echoed in his mind: do not trust anyone. It knows things it shouldn't. He had prepared a small corner of the cabin as a makeshift nursery, blankets piled on a rug in front of the fireplace, a small basket lined with towels, and a thermos of hot water to keep the child warm. Yet as he settled in, the baby's cries returned, high-pitched, almost plaintive, slicing through the cabin's stillness. Jason shushed it gently, rocking it back and forth. Its tiny hands clutched at his coat, its eyes flickering with an intelligence that made him catch his breath. He had never seen such awareness in a newborn. Every instinct told him to stay alert. The shadows cast by the fireplace flickered across the walls, and Jason's imagination ran wild, picturing figures lurking just beyond the windows. A branch tapped sharply against the glass, and he jumped, heart pounding. He whispered reassurances to himself, telling himself that the baby needed him calm, but the unease remained. There was something about this child that unsettled him deeply. After an hour of restless rocking, the baby finally quieted, eyes drooping as sleep took hold. Jason placed it gently in the makeshift crib, but even as he turned away, he felt watched. He glanced back. The infant's gaze was fixed on him, unblinking, as though it understood more than it should. He shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around him. The note's words haunted him: it knows things it shouldn't. What did that mean? Was it a supernatural warning or a cry from a desperate parent? Jason paced the cabin, thinking. He had called his parents and a close friend earlier, explaining the situation without revealing the note, fearing they would panic. They were sympathetic, but his friend's voice trembled when he asked, "Are you sure it's just a baby?" Jason had laughed nervously, but now, alone in the cabin, he realized he couldn't dismiss the thought. Something about this child was unusual, profoundly so. Hours passed slowly. Every creak of the cabin's wooden beams, every whisper of wind against the walls seemed magnified, echoing in the small space. Jason could not sleep. He sat by the fireplace, watching the baby breathe, marveling at the fragile life before him while simultaneously feeling a cold dread settle into his chest. He began to notice minor anomalies. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker than they should have been, almost moving independently, and the baby occasionally twitched as if responding to sounds outside the cabin, sounds he himself could not hear. He tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, cold, stress. Surely that was all it was. But his rationality clashed with the note's warning and the increasingly strange behavior of the infant. Jason wondered if someone, or something, had left the child intentionally in the forest to be found. But why? And what did the note mean about knowing things it shouldn't? His mind raced, alternating between disbelief and fear. As dawn approached, the snow outside glistened pale and cold. Jason, weary but vigilant, watched the baby stir. Its small eyes opened, reflecting the first light of morning. He held his breath. In that moment, he understood that the night had changed everything. He was no longer just a man in a cabin, he was a protector, a guardian against something he barely comprehended. And whatever awaited them outside, in the forest or beyond, would demand courage, vigilance, and a resolve he wasn't sure he possessed yet. The first night ended without incident, but Jason knew deep down that it was only the beginning. The baby's presence had altered his life irreversibly, and the note's words were a shadow looming over every decision he would make from that day forward. He had stumbled into a mystery far beyond the simple act of rescuing a lost infant. The forest held secrets, the note held warnings, and the child held the unknown. The following days were surreal. Jason tried to maintain a routine, feed the baby, keep it warm, and tend to the cabin, yet the small moments were punctuated by events that defied explanation. At first, they were subtle. Objects shifted slightly, a cup sliding a few inches across the table, a blanket falling from a chair when no breeze entered the cabin. Jason chalked it up to his own exhaustion, the cabin settling, the old wood contracting. But the frequency increased, and the precision was impossible to ignore. One afternoon, while rocking the baby gently, Jason noticed something that made him freeze. The child's eyes followed him, not with the random gaze of an infant, but with awareness, calculating, deliberate. Jason lowered his voice, asking a question softly, almost out of habit, "Are you hungry?" The baby blinked, then let out a low, almost knowing coo, its tiny hand reaching toward the cupboard as if expecting it to open. Jason recoiled, heart racing. He had never seen an infant respond like this. At night, the cabin seemed to come alive. Shadows danced unnaturally on the walls, even when the fire was still. Objects he left on tables sometimes disappeared, only to reappear hours later in impossible positions. The baby remained oblivious to Jason's growing paranoia, smiling innocently, yet the eyes, those impossible eyes, sometimes seemed to flicker with an understanding beyond comprehension. Jason began keeping a detailed log, recording the date, time, and circumstances of each strange occurrence. The more he documented, the more undeniable the pattern became. The note's warning replayed in his mind incessantly, "It knows things it shouldn't." Could it be literal? Was this child somehow aware of things outside the normal boundaries of infancy? Jason's mind spun through every possible explanation: sleep deprivation, stress-induced hallucinations, or some rare medical condition granting the child advanced reflexes. But no rational explanation accounted for the eerie precision of the events or the unsettling intelligence in the baby's gaze. Jason began experimenting cautiously. He placed a toy on the table, out of the baby's reach, then watched from a corner. Within minutes, the toy was on the floor beside the crib, exactly aligned in a way that suggested intent rather than chance. He repeated the experiment several times. Each time, the results were the same. The baby seemed to anticipate his actions, manipulating objects almost imperceptibly. A chill ran down his spine. The warning on the note was no longer just ominous words, it was a harbinger. Despite the fear, Jason could not deny a growing sense of fascination. This child, for all its strangeness, was undeniably remarkable. But all was coupled with dread. If the note was accurate, the child's abilities could attract attention Jason was ill-prepared to handle. He realized that the cabin was no longer just a sanctuary. It had become a place of study, observation, and, increasingly, containment. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, heavier than any snow-laden branch outside. By the fifth day, Jason had adopted a rigorous schedule of observe, document, protect. He moved cautiously through the cabin, ensuring the child was never out of sight. He began setting cameras and recording devices to track movements he could not always witness personally. Each night, he reviewed footage, discovering subtle anomalies he had missed in real time. Objects nudged slightly, shadows that moved independently, even faint, unexplainable noises in the background. The combination of fear, wonder, and responsibility began to affect Jason's own mental state. He became hyper-aware, unable to rest fully, constantly anticipating the next event, the next sign that this child was not ordinary. His friends had stopped visiting, sensing the tension in his voice and the strange way he described the infant's behaviors. Jason didn't blame them. Even he found it hard to accept the truth unfolding in front of him. Yet, amid the unease, a bond grew. The baby's dependence, the fragile trust, was real. Every small smile, every gentle coo, reminded Jason why he stayed. Protecting this child was no longer a matter of survival, it was a moral imperative. And still, in the deepest recesses of his mind, the note's warning echoed like a drumbeat: do not trust. It knows things it shouldn't. Jason understood that the line between fear and fascination was thin, and walking it would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. The baby, in its innocence and mystery, had transformed his life, and the events of the coming days would prove that the forest, the note, and the child were all part of a larger story, one that Jason had only just begun to understand. Jason knew he couldn't face this mystery alone. The behaviors he'd observed in the baby were extraordinary, so much so that they defied explanation. He had exhausted his own reasoning, oscillating between disbelief and fear. Something about the note, the child, and the inexplicable events in his cabin demanded expert insight. He decided to reach out to a combination of professionals, pediatricians, psychologists, and even specialists in folklore and paranormal phenomena. The first call was to a pediatrician in the nearest town. Jason explained the situation cautiously, omitting the note's ominous warning at first. The doctor listened politely, asking routine questions about the child's birth, health, and development. When Jason mentioned the baby's unusual alertness, rapid responses, and the odd patterns of movement around objects, the pediatrician grew quiet. "Babies can surprise you," he said cautiously. "But some of what you're describing, it's not within normal ranges. You need to observe closely, but remember, children develop at different rates. Keep documenting everything." Not satisfied, Jason sought psychological insight. A child psychologist agreed to a video consultation. He described the baby's behavior, the moving objects, the gaze that seemed aware beyond its age. The psychologist's expression shifted from professional curiosity to cautious concern. "I've never seen anything quite like this," she admitted. "You might be observing what we call early cognitive hyperawareness, but some of your descriptions, objects moving, precise responses, it defies rational explanation." Even more unnerving were the calls to folklore and paranormal experts. Jason had initially dismissed them as superstition, but desperation and the uncanny events drove him to explore these avenues. One historian specializing in local legends told him stories of children of the woods, infants believed to be born with extraordinary abilities, abandoned to protect both them and the community from unknown dangers. The note, he suggested, might have been written by a previous guardian attempting to warn whoever found the child. Jason's mind reeled. Each expert offered a piece of the puzzle, but none provided certainty. The pediatrician saw an advanced, unusual child, the psychologist detected something uncanny in its awareness, the folklorist hinted at myth woven into reality. All converged on one truth: this baby was extraordinary. And the note, once a terrifying mystery, seemed to fit into this broader narrative of a warning, a plea, a fragment of knowledge left behind to guide the child's protector. Determined to understand more, Jason began gathering materials. He documented every anomaly, every strange occurrence, every subtle movement. He created charts, timelines, and logs, cross-referencing events with environmental conditions, sleep cycles, and even the baby's moods. Patterns emerged. The child responded to stimuli others could not perceive, predicted simple outcomes, and influenced objects with a precision that defied physics. The deeper he delved, the more he realized that his home had become a laboratory of sorts. Yet the weight of responsibility pressed down on him. He was not just a caretaker, he was an observer, a guardian, and a chronicler of something unprecedented. Every decision he made had consequences, and the stakes seemed higher than he could have imagined. Late one night, Jason reflected on the situation. He had always considered himself rational, grounded, and prepared to confront challenges with logic. But the infant before him, innocent and yet profoundly mysterious, challenged every assumption he had about reality. The note's warning echoed relentlessly, "It knows things it shouldn't." Jason now understood the gravity of that message. The child was not simply unusual, it was potentially powerful, and the consequences of misunderstanding or mishandling it could be catastrophic. Despite the fear, a determination grew stronger within him. Jason would not abandon the baby, nor would he ignore the evidence of its extraordinary abilities. If he could uncover even a fraction of the truth, he could protect the child, guide it, and perhaps prevent the unknown dangers hinted at in the note from manifesting. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with mystery and potential peril, but Jason knew one thing: he could not walk away. With renewed resolve, he prepared for the days ahead, ready to confront experts, legends, and the unknown. The forest, the note, and the infant had drawn him into a story far larger than he could have anticipated, a story that demanded courage, observation, and unwavering vigilance. Days turned into weeks, and the strangeness around Jason and the baby intensified. What had started as subtle anomalies, slightly shifted objects, small sounds in empty rooms, now escalated into unexplainable phenomena. The cabin seemed alive in ways he could neither predict nor control. Objects that were carefully placed would vanish from sight, only to reappear elsewhere, perfectly aligned as if the infant itself had moved them. One evening, Jason sat at his desk, reviewing footage from a small camera he had installed near the crib. The recording was unsettling. In the dim flicker of the cabin's light, the baby's hand rose slightly, and a cup on the table slid an inch forward, perfectly balanced. He paused, rewound, and played the clip again. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the precision was unmistakable. The baby was interacting with the environment in ways no infant should. Jason felt his pulse quicken. Electronic devices also began malfunctioning. His phone would ring at odd hours, the signal dropping inexplicably. A lamp flickered violently, and the sound of static occasionally filled the cabin's quiet spaces. Jason documented everything, but the anomalies often defied recording, leaving him reliant on memory and observation. Shadows moved against the flow of light, fleeting and subtle, like silent observers. He began to feel watched, even when alone. Despite the fear, he could not turn away. Each day, he grew more protective, more vigilant. He realized the infant's abilities, whatever they were, might attract attention from forces he could not yet comprehend. He fortified the cabin as best he could, ensuring windows and doors were secure, objects moved out of reach, and recording devices placed strategically. But the baby remained the center of these events, its presence the source of both awe and dread. One night, the baby stirred unusually, eyes wide in the darkness. Jason leaned over, whispering softly, trying to calm it. The infant's gaze seemed fixed on a corner of the room, unblinking. Suddenly, a small chair, which had been against the wall, tipped over slowly, as if nudged by an invisible hand. Jason froze, heart hammering. His rational mind scrambled for explanations, drafts, uneven floors, fatigue, but none fit. The baby looked back at him, cooing innocently, while he trembled with the realization that these events were not random. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. A small stack of papers would float a few inches, returning to its original position only hours later. Knobs on doors would twist without contact. Jason documented meticulously, understanding that the infant's abilities were growing in strength and precision. The note's warning returned to his mind with renewed urgency: do not trust. It knows things it shouldn't. He realized the words were not just a caution, they were a prophecy. Living under constant tension began to take its toll. Jason's sleep was fragmented, his meals often forgotten, his mind consumed by the need to observe and protect. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a labyrinth of unseen forces. Yet, even amid the fear, he was captivated. The child was extraordinary, its potential unimaginable. And though the phenomena were unsettling, Jason could not deny a deepening bond. The infant depended on him, and he was committed to ensuring its safety, no matter the cost. He began experimenting cautiously, testing boundaries while ensuring the baby's safety. He placed small objects in various positions, recording how they moved. Each time, the infant seemed to respond deliberately, influencing objects, predicting outcomes, almost communicating without words. Jason realized he was witnessing a phenomenon far beyond science and reason. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, demanding his full attention and vigilance. By the end of the week, Jason understood a critical truth: the cabin, the infant, and the surrounding forest were part of an interconnected mystery. The baby's abilities were real, powerful, and growing, and he alone had the responsibility to protect, observe, and understand them. Fear remained a constant companion, but so did determination. He had crossed a threshold from ordinary life into something extraordinary, a world in which every moment demanded caution, courage, and unwavering vigilance. Word about the abandoned baby, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding it, spread through the nearby town faster than Jason had anticipated. At first, it was just whispers in the grocery store or fleeting glances when he passed neighbors on the street. Then came questions, subtle at first, polite inquiries about the child's health, the snowy forest, and the note he had found. But curiosity soon turned to unease. Some townspeople were sympathetic. They offered blankets, food, or advice, worried about the baby's safety. Others, however, were fearful, their suspicion heightened by the strange rumors Jason had not been able to dispel. He noticed children in the neighborhood giving the baby wary looks, as if sensing something unusual in its presence. Friends who once visited regularly hesitated now, citing vague fears, preferring distance over involvement. Jason tried to maintain normalcy, reassuring the community that the child was healthy, warm, and well cared for. But the events in his cabin were increasingly difficult to hide. The baby's strange abilities, objects moving without explanation, subtle shifts in shadows, the uncanny intelligence in its gaze, were nearly impossible to explain convincingly. And when rumors of these phenomena began circulating, the town's tension grew. Some people whispered that the child was cursed, or that Jason had stumbled into something dangerous beyond human comprehension. A few concerned neighbors approached him directly, asking if he had considered taking the baby to authorities. Jason shook his head firmly, unwilling to risk exposing the child to outsiders who might fear it rather than help. The note's warning echoed in his mind: do not trust anyone. The words felt prophetic, a lifeline guiding him through the community's judgment and suspicion. Protecting the baby required discretion, vigilance, and courage. Even as he navigated public opinion, Jason realized the baby's presence had altered the dynamics of the town. People were cautious, watching his cabin from afar, exchanging theories about what was happening inside. Some believed the child had supernatural origins, others thought Jason's mental state had been compromised by isolation and stress. Jason ignored the gossip, focusing instead on maintaining the baby's safety. He reinforced the cabin, limited outside interaction, and documented everything meticulously. Despite the growing tension, there were moments of warmth. A neighbor brought homemade food and left it at the edge of the property, leaving a note of encouragement. Another offered to check on the cabin while Jason stepped into town for supplies, respecting his need for privacy. These gestures reminded him that not all human judgment was driven by fear. Some people still acted with compassion, even in the face of uncertainty. The town's reaction, however, remained a constant pressure. Jason had to weigh every step carefully: when to go outside, how to speak with others, what to reveal and what to withhold. The balance was delicate. He feared that any misstep could draw unwanted attention to the child or provoke misunderstanding. The note's words had never felt more real: trust was a dangerous luxury, and vigilance was essential. As the days passed, Jason observed the baby more closely, noting how it seemed aware not only of his movements but of the town's energy. The child's reactions to distant voices, shadowed windows, or unfamiliar faces were subtle yet precise, reinforcing his belief that the note's warning was accurate. This awareness, combined with the community's wary gaze, made him feel both protective and isolated. He had become the sole guardian against threats he could barely define, threats both real and perceived. Yet amid fear, there was determination. Jason knew the importance of forging a careful path. He could not ignore the baby's uniqueness, nor could he abandon it to the judgments of others. Protecting the child required strength, courage, and an unwavering commitment to understanding the unknown. And so, while the town's whispers grew louder and suspicion lingered, Jason prepared himself for the challenges ahead. The forest, the note, and the baby had intertwined him in a story larger than any he could have imagined, a story of vigilance, courage, and profound responsibility. Jason had spent countless hours researching, documenting, and consulting experts, yet the full truth of the baby's origins remained elusive. One evening, while reviewing a bundle of old journals and local historical records, he discovered a pattern, a recurring story buried in folklore and scattered newspaper clippings. These accounts spoke of children born under extraordinary circumstances, often abandoned in forests to protect them and those around them from powers that could not be understood or controlled. The parallels were striking. Each record described a child with advanced awareness, uncanny perception, and the ability to influence their environment in subtle, sometimes inexplicable ways. Families had hidden such children, sometimes leaving them in the care of distant relatives, sometimes abandoning them in hopes that fate would protect them. And each case had a warning, a note, a message, or a story, designed to safeguard both child and guardian. Jason's mind raced. Could this be the same phenomenon? Was the baby in his cabin part of a lineage he had only just uncovered? He pored over every detail, connecting dots between the folklore, the anomalous events he had recorded, and the ominous note. The handwriting, smudged by snow and moisture, suddenly made sense. It wasn't a warning about some external threat, it was a plea, a desperate message from a previous guardian, someone who had recognized the child's potential and sought to ensure its protection. The note's words, "It knows things it shouldn't," were not an accusation but a caution, highlighting the child's extraordinary awareness and abilities. Jason felt a mix of awe, relief, and lingering fear. The child before him was extraordinary, yes, but not dangerous in the way he had initially feared. The powers were innate, part of a lineage steeped in mystery and caution. The note's urgency, once terrifying, now served as guidance. Vigilance, patience, and protection were paramount. The baby was a being of potential, and Jason's role was to guide it safely through a world that might not understand it. To confirm his hypothesis, Jason began cross-referencing historical records with modern occurrences. He found obscure mentions of children exhibiting advanced problem-solving skills, precognitive awareness, and unusual interactions with their environment, sometimes in rural communities, sometimes in cities, always leaving adults bewildered. These stories, though fragmented and anecdotal, reinforced the pattern. He realized he was witnessing a living continuation of a centuries-old phenomenon, a rare lineage hidden in plain sight. The revelation brought clarity but also new responsibility. Jason understood that the child's abilities could draw attention, curiosity, fear, or even exploitation. Every step he took needed to be cautious, measured, and deliberate. He couldn't simply explain the child to others, nor could he ignore the child's growth and potential. Vigilance was not optional, it was essential. The note, once a source of terror, now served as a map, guiding him in protecting and nurturing this extraordinary life. That night, Jason held the baby close, feeling the warmth of its small body against his chest. For a moment, fear receded, replaced by awe. He whispered softly, almost to himself, acknowledging the responsibility he had accepted, to protect, to observe, and to guide. The child stirred slightly, responding with a gentle coo, and Jason felt an unspoken understanding pass between them. The connection was profound, fragile, and beautiful. The revelation also answered a lingering question: the forest, the snow, the abandoned location, it was all part of the baby's intended path. Someone had ensured that the child would be found by someone capable of protection. Jason now realized that fate had intertwined him with this extraordinary lineage for a purpose. The events of the coming years, the unknown challenges, and the growth of this child would shape not only his life but perhaps the lives of others in ways he could not yet imagine. By dawn, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. The child was not merely a mystery or a source of fear, it was a life of immense potential, deserving protection, guidance, and understanding. He resolved to study, observe, and prepare for the journey ahead, knowing that the revelation he had uncovered was only the beginning. The forest had delivered its secret, the note had guided him, and the baby had chosen him as its guardian. A new chapter had begun, a chapter of vigilance, courage, and profound responsibility. Weeks turned into months, and life in the cabin began to find a fragile rhythm. Jason had come to understand that the child's abilities were not just quirks or anomalies, they were an intrinsic part of its being. Initially, fear had dominated every interaction, but over time, that fear gave way to something deeper, awe, respect, and an unwavering sense of responsibility. He could no longer think of the baby as merely a fragile infant, it was extraordinary, and he was its guardian. Each day, Jason observed the child with careful attention. He noted patterns in its behavior, subtle reactions to stimuli, and instances of awareness that defied logic. Sometimes the infant would reach out for an object before he had even thought to place it within reach. Other times, it seemed to anticipate sounds from the forest, footsteps, distant crows, even the subtle cracking of ice on a nearby stream. Jason documented everything, not just for understanding, but for protection. The note's warning, "Do not trust. It knows things it shouldn't," remained a guiding principle. Yet amid the vigilance, moments of tenderness emerged. Jason discovered the child's laughter, the way it responded to gentle rocking, and the tiny gestures of affection that made his heart swell. Those moments reminded him that while the child was extraordinary, it was still a baby, needing warmth, love, and care. The cabin, once a place of fear and uncertainty, began to feel like a sanctuary, a space where the child could grow safely under his watchful eye. Jason began to experiment with gentle learning exercises, carefully testing the child's awareness without imposing stress. He would place soft toys at varying distances, introduce simple sounds, and observe reactions. The baby's responses were rapid, precise, and increasingly sophisticated. Jason realized that nurturing this child meant not only physical care but also mental and emotional guidance. He became a teacher, a protector, and a chronicler of its growth. Bonding deepened with each passing day. The child would reach for him spontaneously, its tiny hands gripping his fingers with surprising strength. Jason learned to interpret its subtle cues, coos, shifts in posture, and gazes that seemed to communicate intent. Each interaction strengthened their connection, creating a foundation of trust and understanding that transcended ordinary parent-child dynamics. Despite the mysterious nature of its abilities, Jason felt a profound sense of purpose. The surrounding forest, once a symbol of isolation and fear, now became part of their daily life. Jason taught the child to recognize the sounds of wildlife, to distinguish the gentle rustle of leaves from the approach of strangers, and to appreciate the beauty of snow-dusted trees. Every lesson was intertwined with observation, protection, and care. He understood that while the child's abilities were remarkable, its safety and emotional well-being remained paramount. Yet vigilance never fully waned. Jason knew the child's uniqueness could draw attention, curiosity, fear, or exploitation from those outside. He remained cautious about contact with outsiders, even those he trusted. The note had prepared him for this reality, and he respected its wisdom. The balance between trust and caution became an essential part of their daily lives, shaping every choice he made. Through this careful nurturing, Jason noticed changes in himself as well. Fear and anxiety gradually gave way to confidence and patience. He had learned to read the child's cues, to anticipate its needs, and to embrace the unknown with measured courage. Each day reinforced the understanding that the child's extraordinary nature was a gift, one that required dedication, empathy, and unwavering commitment. By the end of their first year together, Jason had fully accepted his role, not just as a caretaker, but as a guide, teacher, and protector. The note, once a source of terror, now symbolized responsibility and guidance. The forest, the cabin, and the child had transformed his life irrevocably, creating a bond that was unbreakable, mysterious, and beautiful. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, grounded in trust, love, and vigilance. Years had passed since Jason first found the freezing infant in the snow-covered forest. The memory of that terrifying discovery, and the ominous note tucked within the blanket, had faded into the background of their shared life, but never fully disappeared. It remained a guiding presence, a reminder of the responsibility, danger, and extraordinary journey that had begun on that cold winter day. The child had grown remarkably, both physically and mentally. Its abilities, once subtle and mysterious, had developed with astonishing precision. Jason had nurtured, guided, and protected it through every stage, balancing vigilance with love. Now, as he watched the child move gracefully around the cabin, interacting with objects in ways that seemed almost preternatural, he felt a mixture of awe and deep humility. This life, once lost to the elements, had become a living miracle, and he had been entrusted with its protection. Reflection became a daily practice for Jason. He often sat by the window, watching the snow fall and thinking about the long road that had brought them here. The forest, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a sanctuary. It had sheltered them, hiding their secret from prying eyes and providing a space for growth, learning, and extraordinary discovery. The child's awareness of the forest, its ability to sense danger and react with calm precision, was a testament to the harmony between nature, life, and mystery. The note that had once terrified him now served as a symbol of wisdom passed through generations. It knows things it shouldn't, it read. At first, Jason had interpreted this as a warning of danger. Now, he understood it as a truth, a recognition of the child's extraordinary potential. It was a reminder that knowledge and power could come in forms that defied comprehension, and that guardianship required patience, courage, and profound respect. Jason realized that their journey was not just about survival, it was about legacy. He was creating a foundation of understanding for the child, documenting its growth, behavior, and abilities, preparing it to navigate a world that might never fully understand its gifts. Every observation, every lesson, every moment of care was part of a tapestry that would shape the child's life and future. The forest, the cabin, and the experiences they had shared were now an indelible part of that legacy. As he reflected, Jason understood the transformation he had undergone. Fear had been replaced by purpose, anxiety had been replaced by vigilance, uncertainty had been replaced by deep, unwavering trust. He had grown into his role as protector, observer, and mentor, shaped by the extraordinary demands of the life he now shared with the child. Their bond was unbreakable, forged through trust, understanding, and shared experience. Yet Jason knew that vigilance would never end. The world outside the forest might one day challenge their sanctuary. Curiosity, exploitation, or misunderstanding could threaten the delicate balance they had established. He was prepared, though, fortified by years of experience, knowledge, and love. Whatever came, he would face it with courage, ensuring the child's safety and growth. The child, now capable of subtle but remarkable feats, looked up at him with the same knowing gaze it had shown as an infant. Jason smiled, recognizing the continuity of their bond across time. The journey from a cold, abandoned forest to the warmth and security of their cabin had been extraordinary, filled with mystery, fear, and ultimately, profound connection. The note's words had guided them, shaping a life defined by vigilance, love, and wonder. As the snow fell silently outside, Jason held the child close, aware that their story was part of something larger than either of them. It was a story of resilience, protection, and the power of guardianship. The child had been abandoned to the elements, left with only a warning and a plea, yet they had both survived, grown, and flourished. Together, they had created a legacy, a testament to the extraordinary within the ordinary, and the enduring strength of trust, care, and courage.